Good afternoon. This is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding, here to do a 2024 update about FBAR penalties and the difference between willfulness and non-willfulness, how it impacts taxpayers, how the IRS enforces it, and what you could do to try to avoid, minimize, or eliminate penalties for FBAR. A little bit of background, right? FBAR is foreign bank and financial account reporting. It's not limited to just foreign bank accounts. It includes investment accounts, life insurance policies, pension plans, mutual funds, all different flavors of foreign investments. Typically, it's three types of individuals who have to file the FBAR. It's U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, foreign nationals who meet the substantial presence test. If you meet the substantial presence test and you meet the closer connection exception or another exception, maybe you can avoid it. Possibly as a permanent resident who makes a treaty election to be treated as a foreign person. IRS publication 5569 says no. The recent case in ROS Day says maybe. So something to consider. But typically for individuals, it's those three categories of people. FBAR is filed in any year that the taxpayer has more than $10,000 in annual aggregate total of foreign accounts, not per account, in total. So one account with $600,000, 14 accounts with $2,000 each. If the total value of all the accounts on any given day exceeds $10,000, that's when you have to file it. The FBAR is typically due April 15th. It's on automatic extension until October. It's typically filed online, electronically, directly on the FinCEN website, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. But it rarely has anything to do with crime. Something to keep in mind is that even though it's a FinCEN form and it's filed on the FinCEN website, since 2001 or 2003, the IRS has been tasked with enforcement. So the problem becomes if a taxpayer didn't file the form or files it late, doesn't go through one of the amnesty programs, they could get hit with significant fines and penalties. Under the amnesty programs, we'll talk about a bit later, the penalties are different. Streamlined foreign, there's no penalty. Streamlined domestic, there's a 5% penalty. Delinquency procedures can vary. Same with reasonable cause. Excuse me. Non-willfulness. So there is no clear-cut, bright-line test for non-willfulness. It's a totality of the circumstance, right? If you're listening to this on YouTube, we have a link associated with it, and in that link we have various examples that you can refer to give you an idea. You didn't know about the account. You didn't know that it was reportable. You don't have a CPR. You had one, they never asked, or you misunderstood what's considered a foreign account, what's considered foreign, maybe the accounts in the country that you're from. That's generally going to be non-willful. The majority of violations are going to be non-willful. The penalty for a non-willful violation is maximum $10,000 per year, typically up to 6 years statute of limitations. Now, it adjusts for inflation so that $10,000 is closer to $15,000 plus at this point. It used to be per account, not per form, but under Bittner, the Supreme Court said no way, non-willful penalties are limited to $10,000 per year. As I mentioned, most violations are going to be non-willful, depending on what fear-mongering website you might have landed on. You might get the impression because the attorney or the professional wrote it in big red letters that you could do 5 years in jail or prison and, millions of dollars of penalties. Does that happen, once in a blue moon? Yeah, of course. I mean, and we'll get to willfulness in a minute, but the majority of the time it's going to be non-willful. Basically, there is no intent. There's no reckless behavior, reckless disregard. There's no willful blindness. You just didn't know. And oftentimes that's sufficient for non-willfulness. Now, willfulness is bad, but most violations are not going to be willful. With willfulness, it could be 50% or 100,000, whatever's higher. So Joe or Jane has $90,000 in foreign accounts. They're willful. They didn't report. Even though a 50% penalty would be $45,000, the IRS could use the $100,000, and that also adjusts for inflation, and that's closer to $150,000 at this point. So when it comes to willfulness, it doesn't have to be intent. So that's one common misconception. People think willful intent. I try to evade having to report the accounts. I have numbered accounts in Switzerland, or I told my foreign bank intentionally that I'm not a U.S. citizen, so they wouldn't report me under FATCA. But it doesn't have to be intent. It could be reckless disregard, willful blindness. There's lots of different examples we have on our website. But you have a CPA. The CPA goes, "Oh, I'm pretty sure that you have you got to file the FBAR, and why don't you give me a summary of your accounts?" And you go, "I'll get back to you," and then you never do. That's probably going to fall into the willfulness category. Maybe not intent, but reckless disregard, willful blindness. With willfulness penalties and with non-willfulness penalties, the IRS can mitigate, but with willfulness, they're less likely to mitigate. Oftentimes, they'll hit you with the 50% penalty. In our experience, most of the mitigation will come from if you have less than the $100,000, less than $200,000, so that it's $100,000 penalty. Let's say you have an account with $90,000. Sometimes they'll mitigate the 50% penalty, so it's only 50% of the maximum value of the foreign account, not the minimum of $100,000, even though $100,000 is higher. With willfulness, one thing to remember is that reasonable cause is not a defense. So if there's an FBAR violation, either preemptive or in order to abate a penalty that's already been issued, you can try to show that it was reasonable cause and not willful neglect. So if someone is willful, they can't use reasonable cause as for either preemptive or as a defense. For taxpayers who are out of compliance, there are various programs to help you get into compliance. Now, there's many different programs. Some have stopped, some have mutated into other programs. But essentially, if you're willful, you do the VDP program. With VDP, voluntary disclosure, you get hit with a 50% penalty. There's also a penalty on the income, but just focusing on the foreign accounts, 50%. It's 75% for the highest year's tax liability, but 50% for the maximum account value. So people go, well, why would I do VDP instead of just chancing it? Well, if you don't do VDP and you get hit with willfulness penalties, they could get you for 50% per year. It used to be up to 300%, which reflects the 6-year statute of limitations with a 50% penalty per year, but that's changed to 100%. So essentially the penalty could be doubled if you were to get audited, let's say, and then hit with penalties or just hit with penalties outside of VDP. If you're non-willful, there are a lot of options available. There's the streamlined filing compliance procedures. Those are broken down further into streamlined domestic and streamlined foreign. Domestic is for U.S. residents, 5% penalty. Streamlined foreign, penalty waiver. You have to meet the foreign resident test. There's 2 different tests depending on whether you're a green card holder or citizen versus a non-resident who might have met the substantial presence test. There's also reasonable cause and delinquency procedures. Those are alternatives to the non-willful streamlined filing compliance procedures. We have a ton of free information available on our main website and our sub-websites. You can always reach out and schedule a reduced fee initial consultation if it's appropriate to your matter, and it's something that we handle here. Again, my name is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.